From United Nations headquarters in New York, I'd like to welcome Andrea Landry, who is here at a meeting for Indigenous Youth this week. Welcome, Andrea.
Bonjour, hello.
Okay, so Andrea is also the youth executive of a group called the National Association of Friendship Center in Canada. Today we'll be discussing issues facing Indigenous women in that country, issues like gender, identity, and discrimination. So Andrea, for the first question, how do Indigenous women and Indigenous people in Canada identify themselves? Is it through land ownership or specific family heritage?
It differs from community to community. The most integral component of our identity comes through ceremony and our land. The land in itself is seen as a living and breathing entity, and we work in partnership with the land to ensure that we honor it. We do come from a variety of different nations across the country. These nations go in accordance with our bloodlines and our heritage as Indigenous peoples. So I come from a small community in northwestern Ontario called Pays-Plat First Nation. It's a Anishinaabe community. We're also called Ojibwe in the English language, but we identify ourselves as Anishinaabe people. It's through these kinds of things that we really do gain our identity, and in partnership with the land and ceremony is how we are fully developed as an Indigenous person.
How does society treat women in your specific community? Are they treated any differently to any other women?
Indigenous women in Canada have high levels of discrimination and racism within mainly the urban settings. On our reservations it's not so bad because it's Indigenous peoples living together. But when you go to the urban settings, you find high levels of murder and rape, and most of them are hate crimes against our women. In Canada right now, we have over 600 cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women, and these cases aren't being looked into by the RCMP or the federal government, and there's no exact solution to why these cases aren't being looked into. For example, when an Indigenous woman does go missing or is found murdered, a lot of the time the case is kind of left closed in a sense, because simply put, a lot of the time their ideologies are, she's just an Indigenous woman, she's just a prostitute, she's just a hooker, it's not worth it. And it's through this that you see how much it really does impact our young Indigenous women specifically, because a lot of these cases pertain to young Indigenous women under the age of 30. And it's quite frustrating when these cases come up over and over and over again. The number of 600 is just an estimate. There's also an estimated approximation of about 1,000 cases of these women. And it's quite substantial, and many of the Canadian society is very unaware of this situation. They're unaware of why these cases aren't being explored or investigated. So it's pretty difficult being an Indigenous woman in Canada. From the processes of colonization and assimilation, we see the same ideologies implemented into our non-Indigenous counterparts. And the action to engage and create change isn't necessarily there as high as it should be.
And through your association, how can you help women to get the attention they need, particularly in cases of rape and murder?
We are a national umbrella for 125 friendship centers in Canada. We each have provincial territorial associations as well. So the British Columbia Association of Aboriginal Friendship Centers has a program called the Moose Hide Campaign, where they attach a piece of moose hide to themselves and they state that they don't support violence against Indigenous women. And it's through this that they're spreading awareness on a grassroots level. And men are standing up in meetings such as the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, the World Urban Forum, and a variety of other international forums where they're speaking up about this issue and ensuring that national and international bodies are aware of these issues. There's also a program through the Ontario Federation of Indian Friendship Centers called I Am a Kind Man, and it's where they're interacting with young Indigenous boys on the severity of the issue of violence against Indigenous women in Canada. And this way young Indigenous boys are becoming involved in their culture and ceremony and traditions, yet it also gives them a chance to engage with non-Indigenous peoples on these issues that are affecting our women in Canada. So we really do see a sense of momentum gaining within these programs and this movement, and more people are speaking up against it. There's also an organization that we work closely with called the Native Women's Association of Canada, and they're one of the key stakeholders in ensuring that the Canadian government is held accountable and not developing an inquiry into this. They've created collaborations with Amnesty International as well, and you see the international scope really taking a strong lead in regards to this issue and ensuring that the Canadian government is held accountable, because it is a priority and our voices deserve to be heard in all fronts.
In your view, before long, their voices will be heard?
Yes, I think so, for sure, definitely.
And I read also that you were instrumental in creating a movement called Idle No More. Why was that necessary?
So basically the Idle No More movement, I wouldn't say I was necessarily one of the founders. There were 4 founders based out of Saskatchewan, and the reason why this movement started was to ensure that our treaty rights are protected and honored, because the treaty rights were collaborative between the Crown, the federal government, and Indigenous peoples of Canada, and they're not being honored. The 4 founders came together to develop this movement through the utilization of social media. And basically it grew and expanded. I started holding small rallies in the city that I live in Windsor, and also on my reservation of Payspot First Nation. And then from there, myself and my colleague, Jody Kichigo, we organized a national rally on January 11th in Ottawa. We had about 8,000 people present, and it was through this that I really saw the power of including ceremony in all of our rallies. So whether it's hand drumming, whether it's smudging, whether it's putting tobacco in the water and honoring the land, ceremony really grounds us within these rallies, and it's a peaceful movement, and now you see it occurring in other countries around the world. It's become an international movement in a sense, and it's based on the fact that these 4 women saw the reality of how much the Canadian government was implementing assimilative legislation through Bill C-45 and not involving Indigenous peoples in consultation processes. So once other people became aware of this issue, it had a snowball effect, and now you see rallies occurring across Canada. January 28th was another National Day of Action, and I think there was over 100 different movements occurring in different cities across Canada for support of the movement. So it's really gained a powerful sense within Canada.
So could you tell me exactly how is social media helping the cause?
So the first thing they utilized was Twitter, and they used the hashtag #IdleNoMore. And pretty soon all the other Indigenous peoples utilizing Twitter slowly caught on to that, and pretty soon it reached high numbers of tweets. And then you also saw the discriminatory effect of it, though, because people who were against Indigenous peoples in this movement began putting racism into it. After the movement that occurred on January 11th in Ottawa, I received a high variety of hate threats, rape threats, and murder threats after I did a speech on Parliament. And this is just another instance of discrimination against Indigenous women. You know, I'm going to rape you and all the other Indigenous women who are involved with this cause. And it's tweets like that that make me realize I do have power and we can overcome this, because we're standing together in unity, and that's the most important part of this movement. So social media does have its downfalls in regards to this movement, but it also has its benefits because it's created an international community, and we're standing together in solidarity.
But how do those threats affect you personally?
When I first read them, I get frustrated and a little sad, but I always go to ceremony. You know, I'll smudge, so we burn sage or sweetgrass, and you just put it around yourself and pray, and it gets rid of all the negative energy. So I think with the utilization of ceremony, we've discovered that it really does help us get over the issues that we are facing in this case.
Yeah, it's something we should all do.
Yes, definitely.
So from the meeting this week, are you tweeting at all back to your community?
Yeah, I've been tweeting a lot on just inspiring quotations that I've been hearing within the meeting from other regional representatives, as well as just key information that's going to come from this meeting. And I've been getting a lot of responses on keep us updated, keep on telling us what's going on, and it's really inspiring to see the support that I've been gaining from people who can't necessarily be at the meeting, because I'm representing North America, but at the same time it's not my voice at the table. It's the voices of all the youth of North America who are involved with any kind of Indigenous movement, whether it's the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues or Idle No More, or even just in their home community. I'm trying to bring their grassroots voices up to the level of the United Nations, and it's integral that their voices are represented at this table.
And so from this week's meeting, what can you take back to help your people?
I think a lot of the time when I go to United Nations meetings, it's important to write a report, but at the same time, you have to breathe life into that report. You have to provide outcomes, and you have to provide a sense of understanding of how to communicate with your community in regards to what occurred at these meetings. Because I could go to the meeting and come back home and not say a word, and what's the point of that? So to ensure that you do come up with a briefing note of some sort, but also you show the outcomes of the documentation that occurs from the United Nations or the United Nations Permanent Forum, or even provide them with the final document that will be released because of the work of the expert group meeting. So just ensure that everyone is involved and they know the work that is going to become a part of the work that you did while you were attending the United Nations.
Well, thank you, Andrea. I think that's all the time we have. Thank you for coming and discussing important issues affecting Indigenous women in your country.
Thank you. Miigwech.